Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about when your child's OCD says a loved one, whether it's a parent or a sibling, is contaminated. And the amount of overwhelm and destruction that type of theme causes it's undescribable. And I've seen this so much in the AT parenting community and in the families that I've helped over the decades, that when OCD targets the people in your home, that can really turn everything upside down. So we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about why that happens, how people get contaminated, and some major do nots and some things to do in order to contain this struggle, because it can get out of control really fast. But before we get started, I do want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the US and outside of the US. You can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is the right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That's treatmyocd.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. Another thing I want to mention is we give in-depth support. I give in-depth support to parents who are in the trenches like you. We have a lot of families in the AT parenting community who have dealt with contamination themes, have dealt with all sorts of anxiety, OCD issues related to how it's overwhelming, not just their child, but their family. And so you can join the waitlist. It is closed right now, but we do open to the waitlist periodically. And our waitlist is getting pretty big, so we're probably going to open it up pretty soon. You don't want to miss that, because that is just a 3-day event that only goes out to the waitlist. I don't advertise it. It's a quiet thing, but if you're on the wait list, you'll get the email. So join us at atparentingcommunity.com. You can put your name on the wait list and you'll be the first to know when we have that private opening, which, like I said, is coming up probably pretty soon, because we don't like our wait list to get too big before we allow people in kind of through the back door, just the wait list. All right, let's jump into today's topic. So I want to first start with, how do our loved ones get contaminated? This is the number one question I get in the AT parenting community. Contamination can happen for any reason. And a lot of times I think people don't understand how OCD and contamination work. A lot of times when I'm talking to parents in the AT parenting community, they don't understand how a person can be contaminated. And so it creates a lot of confusion. But I think it's important to understand first that when we're talking about contamination OCD, there's a ground zero. And I'm going to link a whole bunch of YouTube videos that I have on contamination, and they're for your kids, teens, or young adults to watch. But it actually might help you too, if you watch these, to fully understand contamination OCD. Because that's the number one issue, is that parents are missing a lot of these things because they don't understand it. But anything can be what I call ground zero. And to me, ground zero is like the epicenter of where the OCD contamination is coming from, what OCD has hooked into and has spun a lie around that says, ooh, that thing, that's contaminated. And the overarching theme around contamination OCD is the idea of spreading. So there's so many different OCD themes, and they act so differently that people miss OCD, because how OCD themes show up is so drastically different in their presentation that when you have a one-sided view of OCD, you miss the other side. You might have symmetry OCD and you are evening things out on your body. You're not spreading things. You're not worried about touching things. You're worried about balancing things. That's going to look totally different than contamination OCD. I might have moral OCD and I have these intrusive thoughts that I'm a bad person. That can turn into contamination OCD, and we're going to talk about that. But that might look totally different. I might just have to confess things to people or check things or do things. Each theme is different. But when we're talking about contamination OCD, and you can have overlapping ones, you can have moral OCD, and I'm going to talk about how that can happen, that overlap. Symmetry OCD, not so much. But with contamination OCD, the foundational aspect of it that is universal when you have this theme is that things spread. So think of it that way. Whatever is contaminated then touches that, and then it touches that, then it touches that, and it's spreading. It's dominating my world. And my number one goal, according to OCD, is that I have to avoid that thing. X, Y, and Z. We're going to talk about what some X, Y, and Z's can be, but I have to avoid that. And that is the foundation of contamination OCD, is that there is a spreader. And I have to manage my world so that I do not touch anything that will contaminate me that is related to my ground zero. Now, sometimes people don't even really know what their ground zero is because they've lost touch with what initially started this. And then it becomes just this, like so many other OCD compulsions do, it becomes this rigid rule that you feel like you have to follow, but you don't even remember why you had to follow it in the first place. I see that more with adults. When kids are starting to have contamination OCD themes, they typically know, once you start digging and exploring with them, they can find the ground zero more often than not. A lot of times we misunderstand ground zero. We think the person is ground zero. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't. We're going to talk about that. But ground zero is the thing that OCD got hooked into. So the stereotypical one is germs. You know, I don't want to get sick. And so things that are germy are my ground zero. So that might start off with things at school are really gross and germy. And the core fear is different too for contamination OCD. So my ground zero might be germs, but my core fear might be different than someone else's core fear around germs. And we want to know all of these things. With contamination OCD, we want to know, well, we already know that it's contamination OCD because when people are avoiding and they can't touch certain things and they have to wash if they touch other things, it's a very classic presentation. It's not rocket science. Sometimes people say, I don't know if my child has OCD, and they'll describe, they have to touch things with their elbows and they can't have me hug them and they can't touch this and they can't sleep in their room. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is not rocket science. Contamination OCD is not a hard thing to spot, even for a therapist who is not OCD trained. This one is a no-brainer because it presents in such an extreme way. But then understanding the core fear that's driving it, that can be a little bit more confusing because I can have 3 people whose ground zero is something that's germy. And so their ground zero might be sickness and germs. And then their OCD says what things are the most germy. So for me, maybe I'm like, school is the germiest place in the world. And so ground zero for me is school. That might be my number one because I have to go there every day. And my fear is germs, but what's my core fear? Well, for some people, it might be I'm going to get sick and I'm going to die, core fear. For some people, it might be I'm going to bring my germs home and I'm going to kill my family, more of a harm OCD theme. Core fear, I'm going to be responsible for killing my family. That's the core fear. Some people might have emetophobia, the fear of throw up. And so the ground zero is germs, but the fear is I'm going to get sick. And the core fear is I don't like the burning sensation when I throw up. Very specific, right? So understanding the core fear is really important too. I actually do have a PDF that outlines how to find the core fear around your child's OCD theme. And so you can download it. It's free. And I just give you language and prompts on how to explore this with your child. Because if you don't know the core fear, you're missing everything. The core fear, normally kids have 1 to 3 core fears, and they can have a gazillion OCD themes over their lifetime and hundreds of compulsions, but it's being driven by 1 to 3 core fears. And understanding that's really important. So you can download that at natashadaniels.com/core fear PDF. natashadaniels.com/core fear PDF. Just go to that and I will send it over your way and get you started on understanding what the core fear is. I have a podcast for kids to understand the ground zero because they may not be aware of it. But that's the first thing, is figuring out, is the person that you love that's being targeted by OCD. I see it as OCD is targeting this person, not your child. But is it because they are ground zero, or is it because they've touched something that is related to ground zero? So like I said before, ground zero could be germs. It could be literally anything. Here are some common ones. Dust, plastic that causes cancer. Sometimes there's just a disgust theme. There is no core fear. It's more of a core fear of a feeling. If I touch this, it's gross and it's disgusting and I don't like that feeling, and that feeling will never go away. And so that is a flavor of OCD. And the core fear is, ew, if I touch this, I'll never be able to get it off me and it will I'll feel gross forever. So let's not forget about disgust OCD as a potential. But I have seen contamination around, let's see, so many different things. Sticky things. I have seen contamination be around memories. I had a bad memory when I wore that shirt. And so now I can't wear that shirt, but that shirt touched my shoes. I can't wear the shoes. So you can have contamination around emotions. You can have contamination around a thought. When I touched that doorknob, I had an impure thought, moral OCD. I told you how they weave into each other. And so now that doorknob is contaminated. If I touch it, I'm going to turn into a bad person. It's irrational. OCD doesn't make rational sense. And the person typically struggling with it has an awareness, especially as they get older, that it's irrational. They know that bad thoughts aren't contagious, but contamination OCD doesn't care about rationality. It just makes them follow these rules. So those are just a few things that can be contaminated. Contamination can be truly anything. One that goes missed a lot because people don't want to talk about it, kids are embarrassed to mention it, is bodily fluid, in particular semen. Number one contamination for boys who are going through puberty and beyond. So when you try to explore what is contaminated, or, what does OCD say is on the doorknob, they're not going to tell you because that's embarrassing. Sometimes that's tied to just a disgust thing. I'm spreading my semen everywhere. It's really gross. It's gross. Other people are going to touch it. And so it's a disgust theme. A lot of times it's a moral OCD thing. I'm spreading something impure to other people. And this hits, puberty. Obviously, we understand why that happens. And it's an easy thing to tie into moral OCD, especially if we're getting into religious themes or scrupulosity. You see that. And sometimes not even religious related, sometimes just feeling perverted or disgusting. OCD just loves to take vulnerabilities, especially developmentally common developmental milestones and steps, your body, and make it a thing because everyone feels awkward around that age. So that one's an important one too, because that one gets forgot a lot. So your loved one can be a target because they have touched one of those things. So it might be that you go to work and you're a nurse and you're around germs all the time. So now you are bringing in ground zero. It might be that you're a firefighter and you have to go to chemical spills or something. Now you are ground zero because of the work that you do. It might be that you touch plastic, or you're putting plates into, you're touching plates in your house and those are made out of plastic. And so you're ground zero. It might be anything. You get my point, right? But it might be that you're bringing in stuff, or you're around stuff, or you've touched stuff in the house that is ground zero. So you can easily turn into a contaminant because anything that touches something that's contaminated becomes contaminated. That's how OCD works around contamination. And I do have a YouTube video on how this spreads. I kind of call it like turning red. Everything's turning red, contaminated. How do you turn things back to green? When half the house is red, it's very easy for someone to accidentally touch something or sit somewhere or do something that turns them red. So it's not hard for this to happen. And it's a big risk for people who are dealing with contamination OCD that the people they love can turn contaminated too. Now, on the other hand, sometimes the loved one is ground zero. They are the source. So everything they touch is getting contaminated because they are literally ground zero. Now, sometimes, this could be literally for any reason. It might be they have a rough relationship with this person. And so there's an emotional contamination. I'll link that YouTube video as well. And so that person is contaminated because of an emotional connection or lack thereof. But it doesn't have to be that way. It's not always that there's a bad relationship and that's why someone's contaminated. That's just one element. I've seen where dads yell too much or dads are punitive and they become contaminated. But that's only one sliver. Often they love the people that are contaminated and they wish that they weren't, and they feel bad that it's affecting their relationship, but they can't move on. This can be for lots of reasons. I've worked with people where they have misophonia, sound rage, and the person makes a lot of noise when they're eating, and they become like truly a ground zero because they're spreading their noise. It makes no sense, but they want to avoid that person because that person triggers their misophonia. But now that person in and of themselves have become ground zero. It kind of doesn't make sense, but that's what OCD does. I have worked with people where the person is contaminated because of their behavior. They drink or they smoke. And so they represent, if you have moral OCD, they represent a contaminant. And so we can argue that they're not really ground zero, that the ground zero is the alcohol or the smoking, but that person can become like their number one ground zero. So I've seen people outside of the home become the main source of contamination too. And sometimes that's because there's something feared about that person, whether they are different or, they are quote unquote bad according to the OCD and they have moral OCD. That person actually becomes contaminated. So many different ways that this can happen. And the important thing to know is that almost all the time, not always, because sometimes there's emotional contamination around trauma, but many times this has nothing to do with the person. And they wish OCD hadn't targeted this person. They love this person. They want to hug this person. They want to go back to where it was, but they can't because they are dealing with so much. So where do you start with this? Well, how can you tell that someone is contaminated? Here are some clues. They won't touch or hug the person. They don't want that person to touch their things. They get really angry if that particular family member touches their things. With contamination OCD, a lot of people get upset when you touch their stuff. But the key with what I'm describing is it's really not for everybody in the family. It's for only specific people or person in the family. Maybe they have to wash after the person has touched their stuff. They might avoid that person. They might want that particular person to follow the rules, like don't hand me my cup or don't sit here. And everyone else is allowed to do those things. That's also a clue that you're dealing with a contaminated loved one. And this is really destructive because it alienates the person. It's really hard not to take it personally when you are the target. And a lot of times you're also the focus of their anger because you're so triggering that they can get very aggressive or volatile around you because you're just a walking fear for them because you are spreading the one thing that they're trying to avoid. Because with OCD, they're playing a game that they'll absolutely lose, which is, let me keep track of everything that's been contaminated. So again, visualize the world of things are turning red. And I have to remember, the couch is red, that cup is red, the left seat of the car is red. And I have to keep all these rules. And then, that red thing just touched something that was green, not contaminated. Now that's red. So you can imagine the stress that they have when there's a walking human being who's red touching everything in the house. And so it causes a lot of conflict. It can cause marital relationship struggles. It can cause siblings to feel isolated or targeted. It can even break up families. I've seen a lot of families really crumble over this particular manifestation of OCD. So after the break, I want to talk about what do you do about this? It's such a hard thing to handle. What are some do's and more importantly, some don'ts? Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with like the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do the exposures. Before it was really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it, so it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com.
Welcome back. So you have a good handle now on not only contamination OCD, but in particular, when a loved one becomes contaminated. So what do you do about it? The first thing I want to say is get professional help. I mean, we're going to go into some concrete things that you can do right now, so don't worry about that. But I do want to say, this is not a wait and see type of problem. When a person becomes contaminated in your home, that's a crisis. Even if it doesn't feel like a crisis right now, it is a slippery slope and it can turn into a crisis very, very quickly. And so there are certain OCD themes that to me require immediate professional help. And contamination OCD in general, to me, requires immediate professional help. And having a loved one be contaminated requires immediate professional help. Some other ones are when it's impacting their eating. Restrictive eating is a no-brainer. That is immediately get professional help. And that can be hard, I know, because there aren't enough OCD therapists out there who are available and who work with kids and teens. So that can be hard. Go to NoCD. They sponsor this episode, but I would say that anyway. Treatmyocd.com, because at least they're in all 50 states and they're around the world and they train their therapists. And so that's a place to start. Go to the IOCDF, the International OCD Foundation. You can go to iocdf.org/find-help and search their directory. Just be aware that they don't vet those people. Anybody can be on their directory. And so you still have to do your own homework as far as, are they qualified? And you want to look for a therapist who at least mentions ERP, exposure response prevention. Without a therapist saying on their website that they do ERP, they can do other things. There are plenty of other supplemental therapies for OCD, including ACT, acceptance commitment therapy. Those are my three recommended therapy modalities are ERP, ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, and SPACE, the SPACE treatment program by Ellie Leibovitz. And so if you have a therapist who's mentioning ERP, ACT, and SPACE, you are at least on paper in good hands because they know the right modalities to work with. But what do? It's a slippery slope. And what I've noticed in the AT parenting community with quite a few members who are in crisis is it's very hard to resist what OCD rules want you to do. And so people are reactive, and in the moment, in the crisis, they cater to OCD because they just don't know what else to do. And so on the small end, or the least overwhelming aspect of it, you start to not touch certain things and not do certain things. But on the extreme side, I have seen a lot of people move out of their bedrooms or, move out of the house. I have seen people living in other places, living in their car, not sleeping in their home, living with relatives, living in hotels, getting stuck in Airbnbs. It becomes a crisis very quickly. You cannot escape contamination OCD. You cannot go to a quote unquote clean environment because this one is contaminated. That is doubling down and high-fiving OCD and communicating inadvertently probably that OCD has a valid complaint. When we take our kids' contamination seriously to that level, we are inadvertently communicating to our child that yes, apparently this environment is not safe and we need to get you into a clean, non-contaminated environment. That doesn't work. If they're so extreme, then the only place they should be going is an inpatient program. Rogers Memorial is a fantastic treatment program. They do intensive outpatient. This is in the United States. It's unfortunate that there aren't a lot of programs that are well known outside of the United States, except a sprinkle that exist. There is the Bergen method, which was actually founded in Norway. And so that's phenomenal and that's great. But separate from that, there's not a lot of really renowned treatment centers for OCD other than the ones in the United States. And my go-to is typically Rogers Memorial for kids. I feel like that's the best place. And I will leave a link in the show notes for them too. But that the only place you should be moving to is a treatment center. Otherwise, you don't want to accommodate the OCD to that level. Now, having said that, there are going to be things that you're going to have to start off slowly with. And if you're not at that point where you have to move out of your house or your child has to move out of your house, let me let you know, and not to overwhelm you, but that can happen really fast. When you start giving in to OCD's demands, especially with contamination OCD, especially with a loved one, it can go from 0 to 60 within a few days. So it is one of those themes where you have to be extra, extra careful about not giving OCD any wiggle room. And what does that mean? It means, one, don't move out of your home and don't have your child move out of your home. Like that's a no-go because you'll have a hard time getting them back. They may never be able to come back. And you might think, well, they do so well at this other place, they're not having any problems, but they will eventually. Things do get recontaminated. And what you're doing is you are hardwiring those neural pathways that say to your child's brain that this is dangerous. This is dangerous. And it's not your house or wherever is contaminated. That just happens to be all red right now, but new places can get red. And so it's never a solution. It's really creating more of a problem. You want to start with resisting OCD's rules in the communal living space. And so you don't want the person, the identified contaminant, you don't want them reducing their presence in the living room or the kitchen, or leaving the kitchen when the person with OCD comes in, or not speaking to them. I've seen all of this happen where they're not, like, they have these rules that you are not allowed to speak to me. You're not allowed to open your mouth. When I come into the kitchen, you have to be quiet because your voice is contaminating the room. If it's a communal area, then you double down and you say, we love you and we know that this is your OCD and we know that you're struggling, but we are not going to be hijacked by your OCD's rules. That's not fair to you because it actually will grow your OCD, and it's not fair to the rest of the house. If you don't know about the SPACE program and you're dealing with this, it's something to really look into. Ellie Leibowitz is out of Yale, and he created the space treatment program, which really honestly isn't rocket science. Most therapists were doing these kind of things anyway, but just systematically pulling back your enabling of OCD. I do have a study guide course on the space program that you can check out in my online school at atparentingsurvivalschool.com, or you can get his book, which is called Breaking Free of Child Anxiety and OCD by Ellie Leibowitz. I'll put a link in the show notes for that too. I'll make a little note. You can also get a space-trained therapist who only works with you at spacetreatment.net, and they'll teach you how to systematically pull back your enabling of OCD, which is really, really important in this particular issue that we're talking about today. And so even if your child's not willing or able to see a therapist, you can at least get your own therapist and get that support, because this becomes really rough really fast. So being able to go into the communal areas of the family house is important. Being able to sit where you want to sit, talk when you want to talk, eat when you want to eat, participate in life as fully as you ever did. Yes, your child might isolate then. They might go into their bedroom, or they might not come out if you're out, but you accommodating and letting them come out so that you isolate is feeding the OCD and isn't helpful. And so sometimes we have to do hard things and symptoms get worse before they get better, but we're not adding to it. Because I think sometimes parents think they're helping by accommodating the contamination in the communal areas. And I keep saying that because we're going to talk about their space in a second. But you're not. You want to not be part of the problem. You want to be part of the solution. And the way to be part of the solution is to not follow OCD's rules. And yes, that might cause more distress in the short term for your child, teen, or young adult. But in the long term, that is the way out of this problem. And so when we come up with a short-term solution of accommodating it to such an extreme, we are actually part of the problem and not the solution. Now, having said that, respecting their room and their space is important. And so it doesn't mean that you have, full reign of go into their room and touch their stuff and hand them their food and do all these things. That's overwhelming. And this is a disorder. They're not wanting to be this way. And so there is this respect of at their pace when it comes to their stuff. And so if they don't want you to go in their room, I would respect that. As they're working through therapy or you're getting help, I would respect that because that's their space. You may down the road, there might be different steps your therapist tells you as far as being able to go in there or having them allow you to come in. But when I'm saying resist OCD's rules, I'm talking about in the communal living areas. When we get into their space, that's something that's nuanced depending on the therapist. Now, sometimes their room is really gross or it's toxic or it's just, and you're not allowed to get in there and it becomes a health hazard. That's different. That's something you're going to have to talk to the therapist about as far as when can we get in there and what does it look like. But when I'm talking about resisting OCD's rules, I'm talking about communal living, the living room, dining room, bathroom, main public areas of the house. The other thing is sometimes they leave their stuff around and you don't want their stuff around, but if you touch it, you're contaminated. They get really angry, but it's still the communal living space. And so as you're working on this, it might be helpful to give them a warning and say, your stuff is in the dining room and I know you don't want me to touch it and I want to respect that, but this is the communal living space. It's for the whole family, not just for you. And so if it's not picked up in an hour, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to put it in your room. And they're not going to want that, but you're giving them a warning. So you're not just randomly going around touching their stuff. And this is their stuff. We're not talking about communal dishes or food or the couch, things that are for everybody. We're talking about their backpack or they're leaving their stuff around. And so giving them a warning before you touch their stuff is a good baby step, right? Because that's not... When we talk about don't give into OCD rules, we're talking about OCD rules in the communal area to start with. And then, ideally, if they're willing to work on it, you're going to slowly want to do exposures around items that the loved one has touched. And that goes way into exposure response prevention and systematically desensitizing and breaking their rules of this person is contaminated. And so a good therapist will slowly, systematically walk you through how do I slowly expose them to the loved one with their agreement, right? We don't do this forcefully or to them. It is a forced thing in the communal area because they have to deal with that, which becomes kind of a natural exposure in and of itself. But when we're doing purposeful exposures, we might take a piece of cloth and that cloth has touched the loved one, and then they touch the cloth without washing. And we slowly maybe touch other things with the cloth to slowly turn things red. And so many things turn red that everything turns green. This is a process. This takes time. This takes commitment, and it takes involvement with your child, teen, or young adult. It's not something you do to them. It's something they do through therapy. That's why getting the right professional help is so, so important. So I hope that the big message you're getting from this episode is slippery slope, big warning. Do not over accommodate communal living space. Do not get kicked out of your own home. Do not listen to OCD's rules when it comes to communal living. Your child will not like this. They will get upset. They'll get angry. They will tell you you're not helping, that you're hurtful. If they are so much in a crisis that you're worried about self-harm or aggression to others, then they need a higher level of care. And a higher level of care means they need intensive outpatient, or they need a residential program where they actually are living somewhere getting OCD treatment. And again, one of the few places that I would look at is Rogers Memorial. And I also like McLean. There's a McLean in Houston and a McLean in Boston. And that is another one that I would send my kids to. But getting that intensive treatment is critical. And getting a space-trained therapist, if you need the help and support for someone to say, you've got this is what you do need to do, and making sure that your child is safe while you're doing it is important too. So I hope that you found this helpful. If you are finding my podcast helpful in general, and I'm helping guide you, and you're feeling like, without this podcast, I don't know what we'd be doing, then don't forget to write a review. I haven't gotten a review since November, which is really unusual. So if you have been a long-term listener or a new listener, don't forget to write a review on Apple. It's where I'm normally finding reviews. Other places, I don't really see them. But if you're listening on Apple, please leave a review, and I'll be reading it next time to show my gratitude. And no matter where you're listening, don't forget to hit a star and rate the podcast, because that lets other parents know through all this noise of OCD, there is some good clinically sound advice, free advice out there to support them. Parents won't know if it's not popping up in their feed. So help spread that information and give it to people that need it. I appreciate that. And I hope that you find the sparkle in everything you do. And I'll talk to you again next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.